last night.
Huh? Oh, hey, higher view. You caught us mid-conversation. So welcome. Today is Thursday. We have an amazing show for you. And we have Robert Hotchkin here just discussing his latest adventures in putting 27 shows together, et cetera. So today we're just adding one more to his to-do list. But I know he's got a huge deposit. I know you're going to absolutely love hearing from him. He's a champion of women. And we love all of those bows that are shooting our arrows, right? So Robert, welcome. Julie, why don't you introduce a little bit about him for those that might not know about him? I don't know who doesn't know about him, but right. There's got to be somebody out there. And
I'm sure there are.
Yeah, absolutely. So Robert and I had the opportunity of meeting actually at Women on the Frontlines in Arizona in 2018. And then shortly after, I believe I started working for Elijah List. And then I know that he had a book out and I was in advertising and sales. And so I just reached out to him and I said, hey, is there anything that we can do to help? Little did I know he was already being, on our platform, but I was learning. I didn't know. So I was reaching out to the ones that the Lord had recently connected me to. And then I've just been following what he's doing with how he's championing women, how he's championing men to take the call to rise up, to take their position in the home and just in the nation. Because as we know, like we talked about yesterday, just the fatherless nation that we are in right now. And I believe Robert has such a father mantle on his life. He's such a spiritual dad to so many. And so it's such an honor to have you on here, Robert. Welcome to the Higher View. And I want to find out a little bit backstory because it doesn't sound like you really grew up knowing who the Lord was. So talk about that experience and when did that conversion happen?
Oh, yeah. I did not grow up in a born-again Christian home. I didn't really grow up going to church. I mean, we'd go on like Christmas Eve and Easter because it was the socially acceptable thing to do. Mm-hmm. But I didn't grow up knowing the Lord, didn't grow up reading the Bible, none of that. I actually was the exact opposite. I was a mocker and persecutor of Christians. I was an intellectual, emotional, and very occasional, just obnoxious bully to Christians. I used to say Christianity is a crutch for weak people that can't make it on their own. And then one day I found out I was right. I was splitting wood outside my cabin in the woods of Montana. I was living a semi-retired life in my early 30s. I had worked in the big budget creative side of big budget advertising in Chicago for years and had semi-retired in my early 30s, freelancing for different places around the country. But I lived in a cabin in the woods and I heated that cabin with a wood stove. So I split a lot of wood. And long story short, I was going through a challenging time and the Lord showed up and declared, I refuse not to love you.
Wow.
And a God that I'd made fun of my entire life for almost 4 decades showed up and he didn't attack me. He didn't malign me. He didn't criticize me. He declared, I refuse not to love you. And for the first time in my life, I felt complete, utter, total love and acceptance. And considering it was from the God I'd made fun of, it made it all the more amazing. And the next day I had another encounter with him and I asked him into my heart and he came flooding into my heart. And I wept uncontrollably for 3 hours and went through a sovereign deliverance and inner healing in those 3 hours. And it wasn't long after that he called me into full-time ministry. I wrestled a little bit with that because I didn't have a grid. I didn't have a grid for any of it, but I didn't have a grid for what full-time ministry would look like. But after a while, I was like, Lord, if it's you, I'm going to trust you. And I gave up everything that couldn't fit in my old Cherokee and drove down to Mesa, Arizona, and was part of starting our U.S. ministry down here.
Wow. That is so, I love what you just said. I mean, we could have stopped right when you said, I refuse not to love you.
Yeah.
I just feel like we should have this Selah pause.
Yeah.
Today, on my news feed was a woman, who apparently, was a contact or a friend or whatever. So it popped up on my newsfeed and she had made this statement that she was going to shred her Bible and burn her Bible because she's, sick of this fake God. I'm, much more comfortable with the devil, or along those lines, right? And I'm so ready for Papa God to show up on the scene to her and be like, that's okay. I refuse to not love you. You know what I mean? I'm like, that thought just wrecks me. That I love. I need that like on my wall.
And the thing that blew me away, Melissa, was years later, I was going through a very challenging season. I went through about a dozen years of really challenging health situation. And several years into it, when I was really discouraged, I cried out to the Lord, and I was laying on a couch in an apartment in Riga, Latvia. I was in Eastern Europe, so I could get some experimental treatments that weren't available in the US. And I cried out to God, because in that moment, all of a sudden it struck me, Lord, when you showed up, why did you say, I refuse not to love you? Whenever you have me minister your love, you simply have me look in people's eyes and say, Jesus loves you, and your love flows into them. Why didn't you just say, I love you? Why did you put it that way? And immediately he spoke to me and said, because your entire life, for almost 4 decades, people had said, I love you, until they didn't. And your entire experience was love was based on a certain performance parameter, because everyone who said I loved you did until you did or said something they didn't like, and they withdrew love. And he said, I want you to know my love is completely different. I refuse not to love you. And he started to teach me that love isn't something he does or chooses. Love is who he is. And we know that intellectually, but to have, I was brought into the kingdom through a palpable encounter with that. And that's what changes everything. I didn't start becoming a better person to get his love. I started changing and becoming the person he created me to be in his love.
Come on.
So good.
Oh my gosh, that is so good. That is so good. There's a friend of mine, it's funny, named Michael, we'll joke around and we're like, you're so amazing. And his wife will pop up. Yeah, he's amazing until he's not, right? And doesn't that just so coincide with what you're saying? I love you until I don't, right? And that's that human condition that we can get caught into, and forgetting about, supposed to be the unconditional love example of our father, of our brother. That I'm like getting wrecked. So if my voice cracks, just forgive me. That is.
And the devil uses that. The devil's plan since the beginning to get us to disengage with God, because the devil knows God will never disengage from us.
Yeah.
Even as a sinner for almost 40 years, God never stopped pursuing me with his love. I wasn't saved. I wasn't going to heaven, but God would not disengage from showering his love upon me. But the devil, since the garden, think about what he said to Eve, did God really say you can't eat any of this? And she's like, no, just that. So Adam and Eve literally have the buffet of buffets, the smorgasbord of smorgasbords, literally everything in the world, but one thing is for them. And the enemy gets her to focus on that. Yeah. And then he says, but that looks like the best one. So the enemy's plan is always to focus on temporary circumstances to get us to doubt eternal promises. So if we're not seeing something we see in the Word of God, as opposed to knowing it's ours because he loves us and has given it to us, and then operating in it until we see it made manifest, we start to doubt, well, maybe because I got cross at my wife yesterday. God's mad at me and he doesn't love me. So maybe that's not for me. Sure, it's for Julie and Melissa and Oyen because they're amazing, but I still get irritated in traffic. So that's probably why I'm not seeing some things. God's withholding from me. No, God is never withholding from us. Even that fruit on that tree, he wasn't withholding from us. He wasn't keeping anything from us. He was keeping us from harm. Yeah. So when we know we're loved because we're loved because we're loved, then even when God disciplines and corrects, it's to help us walk in a greater manifestation of what we already have, as opposed to dangling a carrot and saying, do better and I'll give you more. God's never a carrot dangling God, but the enemy tells that lie to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that so oftentimes, we'll talk about one of my big things just in leadership, in raising children, in whatever, is, giving people choice, right? Because to me, that's the epitome of love. God did give us choice. He knew what we were going to do, but he gave us choice. And I'm always saying, When we choose right, then he just gets to shower us with love and blessings. When we choose wrong, he gets to teach us. It's like a win-win.
Right.
There's not this God coming in to punish and I'm going to take this away. That's not who he is. And yes, we're going to make bad mistakes. We're going to, sin. We're going to whatever, miss the mark. But all that does for a good father is go, oh, yeah, I need to teach a little bit more in this area. We need to work on this area a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, it says he disciplines us because he loves us. Yeah. And I know for me, 99 times out of 100, the way God disciplines me. Now, he's taken me to the woodshed a couple times because a couple times I needed it. Yeah. But almost every time in almost 18 years now, close to 18 years of being a Christian, the way God tends to discipline me is that loving voice speaks to my heart and says, come on, son, we both know that's not what you're really like.
Yeah.
He's reminding me who I truly am. He's not saying you're being bad, I'm mad at you. He's not saying I'm withholding my love until you do better. He's saying, both know what you're really like. And I want you to walk in the fullness that you already have. I'm not keeping you from it. You are. So I'm here to gently, lovingly remind you because I still believe in you. I want you to believe in you.
Yeah. So good.
Love is higher. Yeah, nothing can separate us from his love. I mean, just hearing your testimony, Robert, I'm going, wow, God, with everything that you went through, you have it's established in your hearts. Nothing can separate you from his love. Isn't this our testimony that we know that experience? Oh, I love it.
So good. Well, and I think that segues great into the fact that you do carry the Father's heart. So you're carrying that Father's mantle.
Yeah. And
right now, in this day and age, fatherlessness is off the charts. Working on a book and doing some studies and stuff like that, really just kind of how the orphan spirit started and, orphanages and whatnot back after the World War, and just really this pattern on increased fatherlessness, in the nation, and how it's affected us, and the trickle down effect, if you will, of fatherlessness and attacking the family. And I just feel so strongly that mothers and fathers are coming on the scene to bring this healing. And I know we had that mother father thing in the Jesus movement, and I think it went sideways in some areas, maybe didn't come to the fullness of what the Father's heart is. But I so feel like it's coming back on the scene right now with a vengeance, if you will, that kind of, ravishing love, that Holy Spirit yesterday brought to mind Kim Walker-Smith's live song, How He Loves. And when she starts prophesying in the middle and she's like, brace yourself, because I'm getting ready to blow in here, with his love. And I'm like, yeah, that's really what I feel like he's getting ready to do. Like, brace yourself, because the mothers and the fathers are getting ready to finally arise and bring that love and bring that healing and bring that direction. And it is going to shake darkness like no tomorrow. And so it's so exciting to me to have you on here. Someone, we've got the woman part down here, right? The higher view. we got lots of mamas in here.
Yeah.
To have a father heart coming in and sharing. And what does that look like to you? That, what we're walking into right now, what does that look like?
Well, first of all, I completely agree. I've been prophesying for 1.5 years that the coming move of God is going to be marked. This next move of God will be marked by his personality. We've had moves marked by his power. We've had moves marked by his presence. This move will have his presence and will have his power but it will be marked by his personality. Because the only thing that's going to bring in a billion plus soul harvest, or billions, plural, soul harvest, is a move marked by his personality. Because there's so many that won't come to church. There's so many that don't even want prayer and ministry out on the street in the name of Jesus. If it's not marked by us, it's the kindness of God that draws someone. It was the kindness of Jesus that allowed the woman at the well to get saved and become the powerful revivalist she was. She felt safe enough to admit, you know what, that thing you're saying about me and the guy I'm living with is true. We forget that in the culture of that day, she had just, as a Samaritan woman, had just given a male Jew the legal right to stone her to death by admitting that. Right. Why would she do that? Because the personality of God was on display, that love, the acceptance. Basically, he doesn't say that in John 4, but he manifested, woman, I refuse not to love you. You're safe with me. You can be real with me. You can be open with me. I'm not here to stone you. I'm not even here to judge you. I'm here to love you and to remind you of your incredible worth and value. And she gets launched out into this amazing revival ministry, which I'm sure, by the way, for your audience, we don't need to emphasize this, but I always do. So we need to get our heads around, God launches women into preaching ministries. He launches them into revival ministries. He launches them into healing ministries. God uses women powerfully. As for the fathers, I see this pattern. When we launched Men on the Frontline several years ago, it came from an encounter I had with God, and I won't go into all the details. But first of all, let's start in Genesis 1:26-28. Where it says, when he made us in his image, male and female, he made us. So this is not an either or. This is not a male or female. The fullest representation, or quite literally representation of God in the earth, is when men and women are in their place doing what God has called them to do. And that's all of the above for men and women. And I personally believe when we started Men on the Frontlines, I'd often hear from people, oh, it's about time. It's about time the men get involved. It's about time. And I would gently address that and say lovingly, I'm so grateful for all the incredibly anointed women of God that have been carrying the torch and carrying the flag. I've been raised up by one, Patricia King. I so appreciate anointed women. I wouldn't be not just the preacher, not just the minister. I wouldn't be the man. I wouldn't be the husband. I wouldn't be the person I am if it wasn't for her. But I would gently address, do you understand, by saying it's about time, there is a hint of condemnation there. And I don't think it's about time men are showing up. I think it's a Kairos moment for men to show up. And there's this whole pattern through the New Testament where God does this. Look at how he meets with Mary and says, I am going to birth the Messiah into the earth through you. He's initiated something with a woman, but then he brought Joseph on board and said, Joseph, I know this is confusing. I know this doesn't make any sense, but I'm speaking to you because you're to be a part of this as well. When Jesus was launching the New Testament church into the earth, it started with Mary in the tomb. When she gets the revelation of the risen Lord, he launches her out into a preaching and teaching ministry where he says to her, now go and tell the brothers. But then the brothers are brought into it. So we are in a Kairos moment when we come alongside what many women and some men have done. There are now many men and some women who are being brought into the flow of God because we need all of us. And when we talk about the fatherless issue, one of the challenges is sometimes when we talk about this, the enemy always wants to stir up offense. And when we talk about the importance of fathers, I've had people challenge me on that and saying, so are you saying all the single mothers that what they've done has been worthless? No, what the single mothers have done has been amazing. They are champions. They are heroes. They are used of God to establish a foundation, but it's not either or, it's both and. And we as a culture have to stop devaluing men in this moment. Now, that doesn't mean men haven't made mistakes. We have, and we must be held accountable to them. But what's going on, and we can look in popular culture, you know, sitcoms, the father's the butt of the joke, commercials, the husband's the buffoon. We devalue, masculinity is under attack right now. Now let's take the Me Too movement, which has been controversial, but I think it's a wonderful thing that happened. It was necessary. It needed to be addressed. But what often happens in culture is we repeat the same mistake in a different direction and call it progress. It is not progress to devalue men. It's progress to value women and then value everyone. Men have made mistakes and we must stop making them. But the solution to devaluing and marginalizing women is not to now devalue and marginalize men.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My husband, so prior to Papa God birthing the Higher View, we had a marriage and mentoring ministry. And our whole thing, really going back to Genesis was, God's original design for man and woman. And we've had so many things prophesied over us. And so like I have this arrow. He actually has the bow on his arm because as the man, he's that strength, right? Because I could throw an arrow at you as hard as I could. It might poke you. It might be really uncomfortable. It's not going to penetrate the target, right? It's that strength of your husband, of the man coming and partnering with you, right? And adding his strength and, and his vision and the whole 9 yards, and how that can be such a strong partnering. And yet again, the bow by itself, I might be able to hit somebody over the head with it, but I'm not really going to take out many people, right? Or it's not going to really be utilized as the weapon it's supposed to be. Exactly. But the two together, is unstoppable. And so I'm so glad to hear you say that it's such a partnering, it's such a co-laboring of each other's strengths. And, mothers out there that have been single moms, literally doing the best that they can. For the most part, the ones that I, am in contact with would absolutely love to have a wonderful, strong man to raise their children with. There's very few that are like, oh, heck no, I don't want any man. Obviously ones that are wounded, that have had terrible experiences. And I get that. And equally, men raising children, because there's single fathers.
Right.
Would love to have an amazing woman to come alongside and raise his children with. And so it's just this co-laboring that we so have to bring more this cohesive thing between men and women, which is completely the opposite of what culture has been doing for a long time. First it was the patriarch, and women had no rights, and, the whole stay home, be barefoot and pregnant, whatever that concept is. And now we have the pendulum swinging, as you've said, men are terrible. They're all, misogynist, power hungry. And I'm like, well, my husband's not. And I am a mom of 3 boys. They're not, how are we making this, global? Are there men out there that have done wrong? Absolutely. Just like
absolutely
out there that have done wrong. But we have to stop painting with this broad brush. And
one of the things I get passionate about, and is when I hear the term toxic masculinity, I say there's no such thing. There's no such thing as toxic masculinity. Now, there is toxic behavior that men can engage in, and they need to stop it. But masculinity is not toxic. Fallen nature's toxic. Men can be toxic. Women can be toxic. That's our fallen, selfish, narcissistic nature. But masculinity is not toxic. And to dismiss an entire gender is to throw away half of God's solution in the earth. I mean, look at the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 16, I think it's verse 13, where when he's addressing all the issues that have come up in the church at Corinth, he gives this incredible letter of counsel for 16 chapters, but he sums it up with this: be strong, stand in your faith, act like men. Now, he's not dismissing the women and saying they're not part of the solution. I actually think he's saying, guys, you need to show up as part of the solution as strong as the women have, or else there's always going to be this lack of balance. And I believe that's one of the things God is doing. And I know, like, some of the things that I've done and some of the books that I've written to champion men, I've been asked, are you going to directly address what the voices are saying against men? And I say very rarely, because I don't think the answer is to shout back more negativity.
Right.
God didn't overcome darkness with light in Genesis 1. I'm sorry. God didn't overcome darkness with more darkness. He overcame it with light.
Yeah.
And so what we've been doing with Men on the Front Lines is that we have been reminding men who they are, so that we become part of the solution. And we do it all from our 17 core values that we teach and reteach, one of which, by the way, is Men on the Front Lines champion and cheer on women, because we know it's both of us in this together, and we must be here for each other. We must cheer each other on and champion one another.
Yeah, that's so good. And to me, so when Dave and I were working on Marriage Out of the Box, we were actually right before the Higher View was birthed. We were getting ready to do what we called a power couple challenge. And that's the whole thing, right? Powerful men and powerful women coming together, and that, you know, that synergy of a power couple. Like, that's our design.
Hey, I married a woman who's way smarter than I am. I adore my wife. And one of the things I love about my brilliant scientist wife is she is so much smarter than I am in so many areas. I love how her mind works. I tend to be the more emotional feeler. She's the more clinical thinker, and she's literally a scientist, but we make a great team. And I'm not saying it never took, there weren't ever times when we had to learn how to walk that out, but that's part of the blessing of refusing not to love and seeing the value in it. I know women are part of the solution because God's blessed me with a woman in my life, my wife, who's part of helping me be the fullness of who I am. Now, someone could say, hey, that's offensive. God is the absolutely, it's God. But God blessed me with this partner that, and has blessed her with me, so that we're stronger together than apart. And of course, it's not the two of us, it's the three of us, because God is part of this relationship. He's the three-stranded cord. But I think we need to, so much, what we're seeing right now is so much of society feels devalued and disempowered. So they're acting out like petulant children. The answer is to remind them who they truly are, is to remind them what they have to make a real difference, not to tear things down, but to build things up. And it's going to take fathers. It's going to take mothers, but the good news is we have him who is the best father and mother of all living inside of us. We were created by relationship. Our God is a relationship. I'll open a huge theological can of worms for you guys. Our God is 3 in 1. I don't pretend to understand the fullness of the Godhead, but our God is a relationship, a glorious, mysterious, unified, harmonious relationship. So we were created by relationship, in relationship, for relationship. Part of how we're made in God's image is, yes, we're 3 in 1, body, soul, and spirit, but we're also made for relationship. Not only for those we agree with, but I look at the world right now and think we need to be out there for the ones who are, we absolutely disagree with how they're behaving, but we don't show up in guilt and shame and punishment. We show up manifesting the personality of God, saying, I refuse not to love you. I see good in you. One of my favorite examples that I have to be reminded of all the time is Jesus in John 1, when Andrew brings Nathanael. Nathanael's first response is, what good can come from Nazareth? I don't want to meet somebody who's come from that. And yet when he shows up on the scene, what does Jesus say? He says, now there's an Israelite with no guile. I like this guy. He doesn't say, oh, here comes that Jew with the attitude problem. I am going to put him in his place. He looks at him and says, what I love about you is you share your heart. You're right out there in your own. I see who you really are. I love you. And it brings this radical change in Nathanael to where now he's like, I want more of you in your kingdom. We're not going to do much good fighting darkness with darkness, offense with offense. But if we show up in the never compromising the gospel, never compromising truth, but also never compromising the character and nature of him who is truth, we're going to see a radical shift. We are in historic times, and we have an opportunity to make history with God if we'll partner with him to stand for his truth in the character and nature of him who is truth.
So good. You know, I can't remember which one it is in the series, but Rick Joyner's book. And there's the visual, you know, of the enemy that's shooting the arrows and the darts and stuff. And he's like, don't, like those that would pick them up to shoot back. would then take on the characteristic of the enemy, and they get pulled into the enemy's camp. And I'm like, exactly. You cannot shoot back with the same arrows that are shooting at us. We're just then we're really just part of the chaos, right? We're just getting pulled in and part of the chaos. So I feel a little like I've lived in a cave because I didn't even know there was a men on the front lines. So throwing that out there, because we have so many women that are like, we have to have the higher view for men. Where is, and I've been talking to my husband about it and everything. I'm like, we need something for the men. So I'm like, why am I going to recreate the wheel? What in the world is going on with men on the front lines? And tell us about that.
Yeah, it started, we'd had our ministry, Women on the Front Lines, for quite some time. And I had an encounter with God where when in my prayer chair one morning, he came to me and he said, he took me into Matthew 4 and he showed me where he individually approached Peter, James, or Simon, James, Andrew, and invited them to come and follow him. That was not a call to be a believer. He saw that they believed, and it was a call to be discipled. It was a call to say, walk with me so I can now teach you how to do kingdom in every sphere of influence that I have for you. And the Lord spoke to my heart and said, I want to do this again. I want you to help me create a space where Holy Spirit can come and individually connect with men to remind them who they are and empower them to bring the kingdom to every sphere of influence that they have. And he said, one thing I am asking you is do not put another performance burden on any of my sons. Because as I've talked to guys, a lot of what I heard was, I wasn't getting passionate for Jesus for a couple reasons. One, I was constantly being told I had to read my Bible more, I had to pray in tongues more, I had to do this more, I had to go to, and I already felt all that. I'm trying to do the best I can to be a good husband, to be a good father. And I just felt like I don't have enough time. So the Lord said, no more pressure. Remind them who they are, remind them of what they have, and I will call them up higher. He also let me know I'm not looking for men on the front lines to be a great move. I'm looking for men on the front lines to empower my sons to be moves of God. And so that's really what Men on the Front Lines is all about. And we have our weekly broadcast, Heroes Arise. God's first strategy for us was, when I first started this, a lot of really great men came alongside of it and said, we want to help you do these huge events. And they mentioned other things in the past before I was even a Christian. And I went to God and God said, no, my strategy for you is I want this to be built from community and connection. I want this to really be a brotherhood. I want to use Men on the Front Lines like a cave of Adullam, where men from all walks of life feel safe to come, meet with me, but be empowered, not only in their relationship with me, but men are hungry for brotherhood and fellowship. So create a space for that. And that's really what we do. We do the show every Wednesday, Heroes Arise. We do these Heroes Arise events all over the world. We were doing them all over the world before the travel restrictions, where we go into different nations to disciple and empower men. And then one of the most fun things we do is our man camp events, where we do these weekend retreats, and we have fellowship times, we have mentoring times, we have teaching and worship times. But really, it's about creating that space where we come together, and we do everything from paintball to shooting to you name it. We usually build it around some kind of activity. But really what's great is guys will always say, I love these events. Guys come to one and then they never want to miss one. And we spend time together. We eat meals together. It's not like where me and Ben and Brad, who do them with me, show up and speak and then disappear. We all spend the weekend together. We all hang out. We all talk. We have breakout groups, but we also have times we just enjoy each other's company. And we have seen guys get radically set on fire for God because they realize God's not trying to put pressure on them to be something they're not. He's trying to remind them who they already are and how they can be difference makers and solution bringers in the spheres of influence they're called to.
So good. So good. I love that. My husband retired from 25 years of law enforcement, SWAT, all that.
God bless him.
And, but the brotherhood, that's what I want. There is that hunger in men for a brotherhood. We hear Band of Brothers, which pretty much I think my husband can say it verbatim, everything in that movie. That I'm like, I really don't want to watch that again, honey. But that brotherhood is just, I think, wired in you guys. And yet we see such a lack of it.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that's the enemy's plan, because I really think just like, you know, we're stronger together, I think men are stronger together also.
Yeah.
You know, and you guys speak a language to each other that's different than, you know, their wife, their sister, their mother. I'm pretty sure that if you were in the higher view with all of us women in our language, you'd be like, what are they, you know, because we all have our own language. We all have our own connection points, right?
Yeah.
But I love that brotherhood, because I really do. I see that it's so missed. I know so many men that have no friends.
Right. There's a reason Jesus sent them out 2 by 2.
Yeah.
It's important to have, it's not just important, it's valuable, it's enriching to have a brother who's there to celebrate with you in the good times, and is there to bolster you in the hard times. Now, that doesn't mean my wife doesn't do that. My wife does do that. My wife's my best friend. My wife is the person whose perspective I always want. My mentor, my spiritual mother, Patricia, I always want her input. I always want her wisdom. There's something in addition to that. And we get into this binary thinking. We get into this either or. We get into this train of offense. Like, oh, so you're saying a man has to have a male friend, so as a wife, I'm not valuable to him as a partner?
Right.
Not at all. You know, you are so valuable. You are so important. God put you in place from the beginning for man and woman to be together. But in that, there's something, like you're saying, about that brotherhood. And one of the things we love with Men on the Front Lines is we say anybody, any man is welcome at any event. If it's an outdoor event, if you've never shot a gun, if you've never baited a hook, come. You will be welcomed. You will be cheered on. If you don't want to do that, you can still come. There's no shame. There's no, I mean, I was a big city, urban, bohemian type guy for most of my adult life and career. I moved from downtown Chicago to the mountains of Montana. And it's a whole long story. I won't go into why, but as I said, I was semi-retired. That's where I picked to go. I didn't grow up shooting. I didn't grow up fishing, but I had guys in that community that here I am, 33 years old, guys in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, who had been outdoorsmen their whole life. Not one of them shamed me. Every single one of them actually said, hey, if you have any questions, ask. I was the only person over the age of 15 in the introduction to shooting course. And my instructors, well, it was funny because the first time they said, which one of these boys is your son? I said, oh, no, I'm taking the class. And they're like, what? And I explained it. Every single one of them looked at me and said, that's fantastic that you want to learn to do it the right way. That's what we're here for. And I experienced that even before I was a Christian. And that's our goal with Men on the Front Lines. Everybody is welcome because every man has something to be. Every one of him carries an aspect of God. And it's not you need to become like this. It's you need to be rallied around and be told you're valuable, that you have been empowered as a son of God. You are a difference maker. You are a solution bringer. You don't need to change who you are. We're going to help you step more fully into who God created you to be.
I love that.
Yeah,
You know, I love the statement, you know, it's not about making you like me. Right?
Right.
Like we always talk about in the higher view. We want unity in our diversity. Like what we're unified about. We're unified about God's love. We're unified about, you know, Jesus. We're unified about the kingdom. But we want everybody's diversity expressed because that's going to give us the fullness of God's female expression, if you will, right? I mean, like you guys doing the same thing with men, it's going to give the fullness of his male exprestion. And if we only focus on like one little slice of his expression, how are we really going to know the Father?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I grew up, you know, I just turned 56. I grew up, my formative years were the 70s. And I grew up in an era when I was told what a man was supposed to be was all that mattered is that you were like really good at sports, strong, silent type. You made a lot of money. You, let me put this delicately, a lot of notches on the bedpost. That made you a real man. and I was not very good at sports. I was a sensitive, artistic kid. I was big, so I was tall and everything. So everyone assumed I was good at sports. My father was an MIT engineer. I was a kid that would climb trees, read Tarzan books, and write short stories. I grew up feeling like I didn't fit in anywhere. I was completely wrong. It wasn't until I encountered God when I realized I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. I just want to walk in the whole healed version of who I am, because I had walked in such a wounded version of that, and that's our goal. That's God's goal for all of us, is every single one of us is created fearsomely and wonderfully, beautifully. We're not to become like somebody else. We're to become more. One of the first prayers God inspired me after my sovereign salvation experience, I didn't yet have a church. I had a Bible and I had the Holy Spirit. So in my cabin at night, I'd talk with God and he'd talk with me. And the first prayer he inspired for me to pray that I can remember was, Lord, help do the work in me you need to do, so you can do the work through me you long to do. Help me be the man you created me to be. And he's still working on it. 18 years, I'm far from done, but that's the journey we're on. And what I see going on in society right now grieves me, because there's this totalitarian lie of there's only one way to think, there's only one thing you can say, and it's so demonic. It's not, as you said, I personally believe God's great with diversity. I mean, look at all the trees he created, look at all the flowers he created, the fish, the wonderful people he created. We are diverse. God's great with diversity. He doesn't want division. Right. And I think one of the things God's really highlighting right now is where Jesus talks about, don't deal with the speck in your brother's eye until you deal with the log in yours. And I personally believe that's so important right now, because if we think, what's a speck? It's a small thing in the eye. It's a small thing that we look at. So I believe what God is saying in this hour is, even with the stuff going on that we absolutely disagree with, don't let how someone else is looking at something become such a log in your eye that you can no longer see their worth and value. Right. So don't look at the people who are rioting in the streets and burning things down and acting out for all the wrong reasons. God had to challenge me because I had gotten frustrated with it. He said, I don't think you see my heart in them. And I was like, no, I do not. And he said, what you have to see is the enemy has twisted good hearts that want to stand up for the disenfranchised and the marginalized, just like me. It's like, but that's not what they're doing. He said, but I don't want how they're behaving or how they're approaching it, a speck in their eye, to become a log in yours where you can't see the value anymore, because then you can't be part of the solution. As soon as you make them other for any reason, politics, behavior, race, religion, you are no longer, it's like with toxic masculinity. Why is that so easy to say right now? Because if you make an entire gender the problem, you don't have to individually deal with the men. Address the men who need addressing, but value them. If we can make anything other, whether it's gender or race or politics, if I'm a Christian conservative Republican, if I make a progressive Democrat other, it's lazy on my part, because now I can just dismiss them whole cloth. And dismissing them whole cloth does nothing, because now a wall is up, a log is in front of me, as opposed to seeing value in them. So I'll engage, so I'll listen, so I'll talk. So yes, I'll disagree, but I won't divide. How often have I done or said something that Jesus did not agree with, yet never once did he divide from me?
Yeah.
Good.
So good.
Love covers the multitude of sins, and we just have to look through the lens of love. Love is a choice as well, Melissa, just like you were talking about choices.
Yeah.
You have to choose, to love one.
Well, and I think too, the passion that's stirring up in these rioters or protesters, it's passion. So it's just passion for the wrong thing. And so there's hope, knowing that it's inside of them. They just need to experience that tangible love of Jesus by us being the hands and feet of Jesus. And like you said, Robert, refusing not to love them, no matter what the cost. So
and in loving them, we'll remind them who they really are. Why do any of us act out? Why do I get irritated in traffic sometimes? Because the enemy lies to us when we feel powerless. The enemy lies to us and tells us that anger, frustration, and especially offense is power. I had a conversation with one of these young people recently that is a middle-aged white man. They were telling me I was everything that's wrong with the world. And I said, well, tell me about that. And I said something. They said, like, right there, that triggers me. And I said, oh, don't give me your power. Tell me what you disagree with. Help me learn from your perspective, but don't give your power away to me. And they said, what do you mean? I said, that whole expression of you're triggering me is actually a lie of disempowerment, not of empowerment, because what you're saying is what I think and what I say has power over your emotions. Don't give me that power. You're way too valuable. You're way too important. We need you to stand in your authority. So even if someone says or does something you disagree with, don't give them power over you. Stand in your power and explain why you disagree with it, so somebody like me can learn from you, because you have an important voice that needs to be heard. Unfortunately, they didn't get that. They got more and more angry, but they gave me a person who I still pray for today, because they are important. And as you said, their passion was aimed in the wrong direction, and they were buying into a lie of victimization and offense that disempowers, even though it feels like power. But if we show up in love, we show up refusing to not see value in these people, not in what they're doing, and like good parents, like good mothers and fathers, we need to create enough relationship that we can then say, hey, come on, you have so much good to do. Let's look at what's going on here. Is this what you'd hope to accomplish? Tell me what you want to accomplish, because I want to come alongside of you, because you have something I think is important and I want to help empower.
Yeah.
So good.
I love that.
So I love the whole, speck and log, right? So we're trying to pick out a speck in somebody's eye. So it's kind of inferring they have a small blind spot.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it's. But by focusing on their small blind spot, literally like a log,
keeps us from seeing them.
Right? Completely blinds us. So what are we not seeing then? We're so focused on the speck, the small thing, that we literally lose sight of the whole person altogether.
That's it.
And so in all of these, which actually just perpetuates the problem. If we want to look at the issue that's going on right now, whether you're saying that they're, rising up out of passion or out of deep woundedness, deep lies, deep hurt, whatever. And the more that we focus on the speck, the more we're blinded and the more they don't feel seen and heard.
Yeah.
It's like so cyclical. And so it can be really empowering. Let's reverse that cycle. Let's, not look at the speck. Look at the other 99.9% of the person, right? Not that we're ignoring or being ignorant to, but I think so many people, if they were to feel fully seen and heard, that in and of itself is going to feel empowering to them.
Totally. And it'll create relationship. And from relationship, then we can mentor, we can bring healing. I personally believe something I feel the Lord showed me years ago when he shares about turning the other cheek. I think we've misunderstood that for a long time. When he says, if you're struck on the right cheek or one cheek, turn the other cheek, I think we've mistaken that for like some, masochistic parable of if they hit you here, let them hit you there. But when we understand in the culture of the day, when you met someone, you presented your cheek for a kiss to say, I want to meet with you. I want to connect with you. I believe what Jesus was saying was, if they strike you on one cheek, even if you have to establish a temporary boundary for your safety, make sure you turn the other cheek to them. Make sure they know you're always open to reestablish relationship, because even though you have to protect yourself from wrong behavior, you still see them as a valuable person worthy of relationship. And the reason I believe this so strongly is because Jesus did it to me for almost 40 years. when I behaved horribly, when I mocked him, when I persecuted his people, yet all he did was turn the other cheek to me. Every time I struck him by mocking him, by mocking his people, by being an intellectual and emotional bully towards somebody trying to share the gospel with me, he never withdrew that cheek. So the day finally, almost 39 years into my life, I was able to receive his love. He was right there to embrace me and pour his love into me. And if we'll do that, and I'm speaking to no one more than me, I sometimes get frustrated. I get irritated. I get discouraged. But ultimately, I realize if I'm letting anything, even really wrong behavior or really bad politics or really destructive policy, if I'm letting that, as you said, be a log so I can no longer see the value in someone. The other day, God fell on me in my prayer chair early one morning, and he had me praying for the politicians I most vehemently disagree with. He had me praying for them. Not complain about them, not malign them. And all of a sudden I was like, you know what? Chuck Schumer could become the next Saul that becomes Paul. I don't agree with most of his positions, most of his policies, but how can I not see value in him, even if I disagree with his positions? I need to be praying for him.
Come on.
So good.
Yeah.
I love, you just gave like a huge paradigm shift, which I absolutely love, on scripture, on that whole turn the other cheek.
Right.
It never makes sense to me. I'm like, that does, like, okay, God, you've like smite nations, like this is not congruent, with the rest of your word. And I'm like, this is not making sense, but that makes tons of sense. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I get to be 50 years old and never see that?
The Sermon on the Mount is all about raising the bar. It's all about this topic we're talking about today, about how do we walk in greater manifestations of our God-given authority. Well, there's no greater authority than love, because love is who God is. We're made by love, in love, for love, to express love. So everything that he's talking about that raises the bar is to, and as you said so well, Oyen, love is a choice. Like we at almost every Christian wedding and many non-Christian weddings, we read 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. When I have a whole teaching called Choose Love, where God showed me from that passage of scripture, when the Apostle Paul talks about what love is, there's not a single thing in there about how love feels. It's what love does, what love chooses. Love can be a feeling. And because when we feel it, it's easier to choose it. Love can be a feeling, but love is always a choice. And it's choosing to be who we truly are, to represent as dominion stewards in the earth, our God. And then what I've learned from my mentor, Patricia King, to ask the question, what does love look like in this situation? What does walking in true kingdom authority and power look like in this situation? Do I need to establish a boundary? Do I need to bring a word of correction? Do I need to remind somebody of their worth and value? Do I need to work a miracle? Do I need to offer what does love look like? Because love is power. Love is authority, because love is God.
Yeah. Well, and love really disengages the power of the enemy, because the enemy is hate.
Right.
And so when we operate in love and we steward what we're doing in love, the enemy's voice and the enemy's tactics become less and less powerful.
Yeah.
Truth in love, so the body will be built up in love. I mean, this is always, whenever I consider, Ephesians 4:16, I go, God, this is how you want your body built up to look like him.
Yeah.
So I've always prayed, 2 Corinthians 3:18, that we will be transformed into his image. And just hearing us all talk about Genesis, when I look, I think, God, how beautiful would it be if we could just look at another human being and see that they are made in your image.
Yeah.
I think that's part of hell's agenda with this whole COVID-19 thing. And I know that's a big topic, and you may not want to go very far down this path with me, but I look at the policies that are being put in place. There is in the spirit, there is such an assignment of fear and isolation, but there's this separation, the cover, the wearing of the mask, all of that. It's the isolation at home. Look, I'm not going to talk about the science or the medical evidence of any of that. I am talking strictly about what is hell's agenda behind it. And it's to create that separation. It's to create that division. It's to create this sense of other. I have friends on both sides of the mask issue and mask debate and science of the masks. But what grieves me is I'm okay with both sides as long as I choose to still love them. And I choose not to be a stumbling block to any of them. That's what love does. Why? Because love is relationship. Love creates relationship. And then from relationship, we can bring healing. We can bring mentoring. We can bring discipling. What is the world hungry for? Fathers and mothers. What are those? Strong expressions of relationship. Right. So that's what we need right now. That's why the Apostle Paul says there's many teachers, but not many fathers. He's not saying teaching isn't important. He's saying if you will take the time to become a father, to create relationship, then your teaching will have much greater impact and much greater transformation, because people will be most open. The people that I get to disciple, the guys I really get to run with and disciple, we see the greatest change in our lives because we're there for one another and we can bring words of loving correction. Why? Because we believe in each other. We're there for each other. We champion each other. So if Ben Hughes or Brad Carter comes to me and says, you know, I heard you say something the other day that I just didn't get. Can we talk about this? And I'm going to think, absolutely. I trust you. You're not maligning. You're not attacking. You're not criticizing. You love me. You want me to walk in the fullness. I want to hear why, because we're brothers or because we're fathers or because we're mothers. So I think that's one of the reasons the enemy has worked so hard to create separation, division, anger, offense, because all of that goes against love, goes against relations. Look at our politicians right now. Look at the media right now. It is so divided. It is so toxic. But we can solve that by getting that outside of the church. And I'll say this. I think the reason we see it running rampant in culture today is because we've allowed it to run rampant in the church. Because we're the dominion stewards in the earth, not CNN. We're the dominion stewards in the earth, not the Senate. Now, they have important roles to play, and they're not playing them very well. But the reason powers and principalities are empowered by us before powers and principalities. We empower powers and principalities before powers and principalities empower people to do wrong. So the good news is, in the church, if we'll shift this, and I have been shouting a message of unity for 3 years, and we're going to see it, because if we're willing, you know, what is it saying? Is it Amos 3:7 or 4:7? How can any two walk together who are not in agreement? And we call that the church split scripture. It's not a declaration that if you're not in agreement, you can't walk together. It's a question. How do you walk together if you're not in agreement? The answer is love. Jesus has not been in agreement with things I've said and done, but he still loves me, still maintains that relationship, so we can walk it out together, and I can learn and I can grow. We need to stop attacking one another in the church, so we'll be more effective at attacking Satan in the world.
Come on.
That's so good. You know, tying that together with the mothers and the fathers, that's one thing that, you know, I think the church primarily, because it all starts with us, as you've stated, really need to get a good grasp of the mother and the father, right? Because when you step into, and stop using the term loosely, because I think it's really used too loosely, especially in the church. When you step into saying, I'm going to be your spiritual mother, right? Or father. When your child goes sideways, you don't go, oh, okay, I guess they're going their own way. Next. You know, no, and we can absolutely apply the prodigal story, right? The father stood watch the whole time. The father was turning the other cheek, right? The father then ran at the first sight of that child to come back. And so this is one of the things, you know, we have a mother mentoring program in the Higher View, and it's such a valuable program, but there's this this weightiness to it that don't step in as a mom unless you're willing to do what love does.
Totally.
You know,
but also don't step in as a son or daughter unless you're willing.
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
I know there's some guys I've mentored and been a spiritual father to, and there are guys I've said no to because because I think it's a really, really incredibly important and blessed commitment, but it's a commitment. I remember one guy years ago said, "Will you be my spiritual father?" And I said, "Tell me what that means to you." And he said, "Will you open doors for me?" I said, "Absolutely, I'll open doors for you, but from relationships." So one of the challenges, you're literally, I'm in your nation right now, but I only spend a couple weeks a year in your nation. How can we create real relationship? Because otherwise it's just a word and there's no real meaning. Yeah. I've had the best spiritual parent anybody could ever have in Patricia King. And in Ron and in her husband, Ron. They are my spiritual mother and father. They are my friends. They are my mentors. But we literally did life together. For my first year in ministry, we lived in 2 trailers in the same trailer park and spent probably close to 18 hours a day together. Wow. I could not hide my issues if I tried, because I did. And I couldn't hide them. And I was blessed with a parent who loved me enough to say, right. I get that God is moving through you powerfully, but what I want to deal with is some character issues to help you run your race well. Yeah. So one of the things, though, I got off track, sorry. No, what you said was so important about what it means to step in as a mother or father, but also as a son or daughter. Yeah. You need to be willing to stay committed to that relationship. Yeah. I tried to run away from Patricia's input twice. God didn't let me. I remember saying to her once, all you want to do is talk to me about things I need to work on. I'm going to go and connect with so-and-so who thinks I'm a great and mighty man of God. And she just shook her head and said, I think God has great things for you. I'm trying to help you get there. Right? And the Lord really convicted me and was like, do not run away. You've run away from relationships. I'm trying to bring healing into your life. Stay. And I think there's we need more mothers and fathers. We need more sons and daughters, but we also need to, as you're saying, Melissa, commit to that, not take it lightly, but understand this is almost as much a covenant relationship as marriage should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for me, and not that I'm disagreeing with you, because you have to learn how to be a son and a daughter. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of physical examples anymore, because we've, so many split homes and all this stuff and latchkey kids that raise themselves. And, so we don't have a whole lot of examples. But for me, the mother and father relationship is so poignant in the fact that, you might have a Peter child, right? Denies you and runs off. And you might have to go and just turn the other cheek. You might have a Judas child, you might have a John child. Yeah. A Mary or a Martha, your spiritual children come as diverse as they come, right? But you have to realize when you step in and position yourself,
that's true.
It's kind of like a box of chocolates. You're not going to know what you're going to get, right? Are you committed to being that spiritual mother or father? If you're not sure, don't go there yet.
You're right.
Continue to stay in a sister or brother relationship. Right. In developing those relationships, continue to be in a child relationship with a spiritual parent, but don't step into that spiritual parent role until you really understand the weightiness of that call, because otherwise we end up, proliferating that orphan spirit in the church.
You're so right. It's a great point. And to your point, from my own life, I became a good spiritual son because I had good spiritual parents. And a real quick example, I remember one of the first times Patricia and Ron sat me down and needed to address some things, because I had 40 years of the world in me, and there were some things they lovingly addressed. I went back to my trailer, and an hour later they called me and said, hey, we're going out for some Mongolian barbecue. Can we treat you? And I remember looking at the phone and thinking, I thought I was in trouble, because I was raised, if you were in trouble, love was withdrawn. And at the age of 40, I not only stepped into ministry, I was getting literally reparented. So at dinner, I was like, I don't understand this. I thought you were mad at me. And Patricia and Ron were like, we're not mad at you at all. We love you. We're committed to you. That's why so over the course of several months of seeing that mom and dad correction, but love never being withdrawn, it helped heal something in me so I could become a spiritual son. So you made a really good point, Melissa. That's a really good point.
Well, and I think that's, I know we're going to have to wrap this up. We're going over. We need to schedule a part 2, but
anytime. This is awesome.
This is so good. So, kind of taking a step back, there's a lot of people that think, oh, I want to be a spiritual mom or I want to be a spiritual dad because I'm in my 50s, I'm in my 60s. But you know what? Even at that age,
Yeah.
we really need to go, well, who's your spiritual mom and who's your spiritual dad?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Have you learned how to be a spiritual daughter or a spiritual son? Because you really, otherwise you're not going to be able to relate to your spiritual daughter or spiritual son if you haven't walked in their shoes yet.
Come on. Yeah.
So it's such a weightiness, and it totally makes sense now that I hear your story, why you have, such an amazing father mantle over you, because you've really experienced so much about the Father, your own conversion experience, your own being raised up by spiritual parents, and building relationship. That is just absolutely amazing.
I know when you're in the second half of life, it can be challenging. Like I said, it was very humbling to even realize in my 40s, I needed to be spiritually parented. I needed that redone. But, and some guys that I've worked with, I always tell them, because, I gave up everything to step into ministry after 4 decades in the world. I was in too much of a hurry. I was approaching it as a career that I wanted to succeed at, as opposed to a calling I wanted to be a blessing in. And thankfully, I was given spiritual parents that could help deal with the wounds in my heart from my own upbringing. And it all gets restored. Like my dad, my biological father and I never got along for most of my life. We're really close, good friends now. We're still incredibly different, but we love each other. We value each other. We enjoy each other. None of that would have happened unless I'd gone through so any point in our life when we have this opportunity, it's never, ever, ever too late. And we should grab hold of it. We should never be in too much of a hurry to not be in relationship, to have relationship, to learn from relationship, and to be a blessing in relationship.
Amen. So good. So good. Well, we're going to have to wrap up, and I hate to. And Julie will be reaching out for a part 2.
Awesome.
We can't stop here. This is so rich. But if you would do me 2 things. One, let everybody know where they can find you. Whatever websites that you have, share that so we can get them on there and links. And then after that, if you wouldn't mind praying us out.
Oh, I'd love to.
Just, calling that out in our viewers and blessing them. I would love that.
Excellent. Well, websites are pretty easy. RobertHotchkin.com is probably the best one to start at, where you can find more information. There's all my most recent resources and things like that. There's also connection to the podcast and to my YouTube channel, where there's tons of free stuff for people. RobertHotchkin.com also has free downloads that you can get there. And then menonthefrontlines.com. We just retooled and relaunched this week, so that's available for everybody. Men on the Frontlines Facebook group. If you're a guy and want to join, apply. And if you're a guy, you will be welcomed in. Apple Podcast, Our Heroes Arise podcast, Robert Hotchkin YouTube channel, and all the usual social media and whatnot. But I'd love to connect and continue to build relationship with you all. Father, I want to thank you that you're right here, right now. God, I thank you for every single person watching, that through the incredible gift of your Son, you restore us to relationship with you. And through the great blessing of your Holy Spirit, I ask that you would draw each of us right now into the very depths of your heart. Every single person is going through something, God, and you are the answer. You're the answer to bring healing, to bring wisdom, to bring insight, to bring promotion, to bring breakthrough. Lord, you are the answer. So I'm asking that it would begin through the gift of your Holy Spirit, that you would draw each of us into the very, very depths of the Father's heart, that we would inhabit that close, intimate, personal space where we are reminded that we are completely loved and totally accepted simply because we are yours. And Lord, all performance pressure that has been put upon the men and women in the world, that would break off now in the revelation of the fullness of your love and acceptance. And every single one of us would go forth from this moment freshly ignited and anointed by your love. And we would do everything from identity, from authority, from blessing, and realize we never have to do anything to get that blessing or that love or that acceptance. Lord, I thank you that you love us. I thank you that your cheek is turned towards us. I thank you that you are reminding us of our worth and value, and you're helping us to walk in our God-given authority so we can be difference makers and solution bringers in the earth to your glory, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We will see you guys tomorrow at THV Nation. Be blessed.
Bye.